Welcome to the Neon Jungle, where only the sharpest minds and the strongest hearts survive the night. Experience the high-stakes drama of city life through our cinematic lens of metallic colors and raw energy. Join the hunt today, hit that subscribe button, and stay alert. At my son's wedding rehearsal dinner, his future in-laws spoke in Italian about how I didn't belong there. They didn't know I had spent 11 years in Milan. I still remember the exact moment I decided not to say a word. It was a Thursday evening in late September, and the restaurant my son's future in-laws had chosen sat on the 42nd floor of a building downtown, the kind of place where the menus have no prices and the sommelier remembers your birthday. My son had warned me it would be formal. I wore my gray suit, the one I bought in 1998 and had tailored twice since then. I polished my shoes the night before. I arrived 7 minutes early and stood near the hostess stand, watching the city lights come on below. My son's name is Daniel. He is 34 years old and works in commercial real estate, which is how he met his fiancée, Sophia. Sophia is beautiful and sharp and laughs with her whole face, and from the first time Daniel brought her home for dinner, I liked her very much. She reminds me a little of my late wife, the way she listens before she speaks, the way she refills your glass without being asked. Sophia's family is Italian. Her father, who I will call my son's future father-in-law, flew in from Florence with his wife 3 days before the wedding. They owned a chain of luxury hotels across Europe and a vineyard outside Siena that had been in the family for 4 generations. This I knew from what Daniel had told me. What Daniel had also told me, gently, carefully, the way a son tells his father something he hopes won't hurt, was that Sophia's parents were his word particular. I told him I understood. I told him not to worry. What Daniel didn't know, what I had never thought to mention in 34 years of raising him, was that I had lived in Milan from 1987 to 1998. I was an aerospace engineer. My company sent me there when I was 31 years old, newly divorced, with a single suitcase and a 2-year contract that became 4 and then became 11. I learned Italian the way you learn a language when it is the only one spoken around you, slowly at first, then all at once, and then one day you dream in it and don't notice until you wake up. I came back to the States when Daniel was in elementary school. I raised him in Ohio. We did not talk much about Milan. It belonged to a chapter of my life that felt separate, personal, the way certain years do when you've lived long enough to have chapters at all. So when I walked into that restaurant on a Thursday evening in September and extended my hand to Sophia's father, I did it in English, and I smiled, and I said it was a pleasure to finally meet him. He shook my hand the way a man shakes the hand of someone he has already decided doesn't matter, firm enough to be polite, brief enough to be honest. His wife air-kissed both my cheeks and said something in Italian to her husband as she pulled back. I kept my expression pleasant. I moved toward my chair. She had said, with the relaxed confidence of someone who has never once been surprised, that he seemed exactly as she had imagined. Provincial. I sat down. I unfolded my napkin. I picked up the menu. The table seated 12. Daniel and Sophia sat together at the center, their shoulders touching, the way young people in love sit when they still think the world is watching them and are glad of it. On one side of them sat Sophia's younger brother, Marco, 26, loud in the cheerful way of young men who have never had to work for a room's attention. On the other side sat Sophia's aunt, who had flown in from Rome and who spent most of the dinner taking photographs of the food before it was touched. I sat across from Sophia's parents. Between us was a vase of white flowers I didn't know the name of, and 2 candles that cast everyone in a light that was probably meant to be flattering. The first hour went smoothly. We talked about the wedding venue, a restored estate 40 minutes outside the city. We talked about the weather forecast, which was good. Marco told a story about a boat he had rented in Croatia that summer, and everyone laughed. And I laughed too because it was genuinely funny. Sophia kept catching my eye across the table and smiling in a way that meant she was glad I was there, and that steadied me. Then the main course arrived. The sommelier poured the wine of Barolo, which I recognized before I saw the label, because I know what Barolo smells like. My son's future father-in-law swirled his glass and spoke to his wife in Italian. He said the wine was adequate, but that the restaurant clearly didn't know how to store it properly, and that Americans never understood that a great Barolo needed at least another decade before you opened it. His wife nodded and said, also in Italian, that it didn't matter, that the evening would be over soon enough. Then she looked at me, and she said to her husband, ask him what he does. It will be brief. Her husband looked at me with a polished smile. In English, he asked what I had done for work before I retired. I told him I was an aerospace engineer. I had spent 30 years working on commercial aircraft navigation systems. He nodded as though I had said something he already knew. He turned back to his wife and said, in Italian, that it sounded like a job for someone who was good with tools. I lifted my wine. I let it sit on my tongue for a moment. The tannins were firm and the fruit was still tight, and I thought, privately, that he was right about the storage. But I also thought that a wine this young had a kind of stubbornness to it that I found admirable. I set the glass down. I did not say anything. Marco was telling another story. Daniel was listening with the focused expression he gets when he is trying to memorize something. Sophia was asking the server about the dessert menu. The candles flickered. Sophia's father said to his wife, in Italian, that he had looked me up online, that I lived in a house worth perhaps $300,000, that he hoped Sophia understood what she was marrying into in terms of the other side of the family. His wife said she had spoken to Sophia about it already, that Sophia was stubborn, like her father, and that there was nothing to be done. He said, at least the man looks respectable, for Ohio. She laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that is also a sigh. I cut into my fish. It was excellent. The chef had used capers and a lemon butter that was restrained in exactly the right way, and I thought about the trattoria near my old apartment in the Navigli district that had made a similar dish every Friday, and the owner, a man named Enzo, who had argued with me every single time about whether capers belonged in it. Daniel leaned across the table. He asked me if I was enjoying the food. I told him it was wonderful. He looked relieved. He is a good boy. He worries. Sophia's mother said to her husband, in Italian, still in the quiet register of a private conversation, that she wondered if the son had inherited anything of substance. That real estate in the Midwest was not quite the same thing. Her husband said, Sophia could have done better, but she is happy. That will have to be enough. I took a slow sip of water. Outside the windows, the city was fully dark now, and the lights stretched out in every direction, and it looked, from 42 floors up, like something that had been carefully arranged. There is a particular kind of patience that comes with age. People mistake it for passivity. It isn't. It is the understanding that most moments do not require your immediate response, that the right time to speak is rarely the first time you feel the urge. I had learned this the hard way, in my 30s, in a city where I didn't speak the language at first and had no choice but to listen. And what I learned, in all those years of listening, was that people tell you everything if you give them enough time and silence. Sophia's father told me over the next 40 minutes in Italian, without knowing he was telling me anything at all, the following: that he respected no one in Sophia's life on my side of the family, that he intended to use the wedding as an opportunity to establish certain financial expectations with Daniel, that he had spoken to his lawyer about the inheritance structure and intended to keep it, as he put it, clean, and that he found the American custom of rehearsal dinners unnecessary and vaguely exhausting. I found this last part almost charming. Dessert came. Sophia's aunt put her camera away. Marco had moved on to telling a story about a football match he'd attended in Naples, and Sophia was laughing and arguing with him in a mix of English and Italian, the easy bilingual rhythm of someone who grew up with both. Daniel watched her with the particular expression of a man who cannot believe his good luck, and I felt, watching him, a kind of clean happiness that had nothing to do with the table or the evening or anything that had been said. Then Sophia's father cleared his throat and said, in English, addressing the table generally, that he wanted to say a few words about the wedding. He spoke for several minutes. He talked about Sophia, about her childhood, about the values their family had instilled in her. He talked about Daniel respectfully but briefly, the way you mention a supporting actor. He talked about the future and what they hoped for, and the importance of family legacy. When he finished, he looked at me and said, graciously, that he imagined I might want to say something as well. It was a polite dismissal, disguised as an invitation, the kind of graciousness that expects nothing. I set my dessert fork down. I folded my hands on the table, and then I spoke, in Italian, not haltingly, not with an accent thick enough to signal apology, but in the cadenced, particular Italian of someone who learned it in Milan in the late 80s, who argued about capers with a man named Enzo every Friday for 6 years, who read the Corriere della Sera on the tram every morning, who once gave a 3-hour technical presentation to a room of engineers in Rome and answered questions for 40 minutes afterward. I said that I was grateful to be there, that I had listened carefully all evening, that the Barolo was, as his wife had correctly observed, stored slightly too warm, but that I found it had a character to it that I respected anyway, a kind of refusal to be anything other than what it was. I said that I had lived in Milan for 11 years, and that during those years I had come to understand that Italians valued, above almost everything, the quiet accumulation of excellence, the work that speaks without announcement. I said I had tried to live that way, and that I had tried to raise my son that way, and that whatever the value of a house in Ohio, I was proud of the man sitting next to Sophia. I said that I hoped our families would come to know each other honestly, the way you know wine not from the label, but from what is actually in the glass. Then I switched back to English, because Sophia was staring at me with her mouth open, and Marco had stopped talking completely, and my son was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something between astonishment and the particular pride a child feels when they realize there are parts of their parent they have never known. The silence lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then Sophia said in Italian to her father, "I told you." Her father looked at me for a long moment. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not embarrassment exactly. Men like him do not embarrass easily. Something more like recalibration, the quiet internal adjustment of someone who has misjudged the distance between two things. He said, in Italian, that he owed me an apology for certain things that had been said this evening. I told him, in Italian, that the evening was young, and that I would have another glass of wine if he was willing to pour it. He picked up the bottle. There is a version of this story where I would have said something cutting, something devastating, a response so perfectly constructed that no reply was possible. I have heard those kinds of stories, and I understand the appeal. But I am 63 years old, and what I have learned in 63 years is that the most lasting kind of authority is the kind that doesn't need to perform itself, the kind that simply exists and waits to be recognized. The rehearsal dinner ended 2 hours later. Sophia's mother kissed both my cheeks again on the way out, but this time she paused and held my face for a moment, the way older Italian women do when they have decided you are worthy of real affection. And she said I had beautiful eyes, and that I reminded her of her husband when he was young and still capable of being surprised. I took that as a compliment. Marco stopped me near the elevators. He was grinning. He said, "You knew the whole time. This evening. You understood everything." I told him I had understood. He said, "Why didn't you say something earlier?" I thought about that for a moment. About Enzo and the capers, about the tram in the morning and the newspaper, about the years in that city that had shaped something in me so quietly, I had almost forgotten it was there. I told Marco that some things are worth waiting for. He laughed a full, real laugh and clapped me on the shoulder. In the elevator down, Daniel stood beside me. He didn't say anything for a moment. The floors descended. The city lights rose into view through the glass wall. Then he said, "Dad, you never told me." I told him it never seemed like the right time. He was quiet again. Then, 11 years? I said, 11 years. He looked out at the city. He said that he had a lot of questions. I told him we had time. The wedding was in 2 days, and the rehearsal was tomorrow, and after that there would be a Sunday morning when everyone had gone home and it was just the two of us. And I would make coffee the way I learned to make it in Milan, which is to say with patience and without shortcuts. And I would tell him everything he wanted to know. He nodded. He put his hand briefly on my arm. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. The city was cool and clear outside, and the night smelled like autumn starting, and my son walked beside me through the glass doors and out into it. The wedding 2 days later was beautiful. The estate was covered in white flowers whose names I mostly didn't know, and the light that afternoon was the particular gold of October in the Midwest, flat and generous and honest. Sophia cried when she saw Daniel at the altar, which made Daniel cry, which made me cry, and I am not a man who cries easily. During the reception, Sophia's father found me at the bar. He poured me a glass from a bottle. He had brought himself a Brunello, 2015, the good kind, and he said that he had called his brother in Florence that morning and told him about the previous evening. I asked what his brother had said. He said his brother had laughed for a long time and told him it served him right. I told him his brother sounded like someone I would like. He said that when this was over, when the newlyweds were settled, he hoped I would come to Florence, that he would show me the vineyard, that there were things there worth seeing if you knew how to look. I told him I would like that very much. We stood there for a moment, two old men at a bar at a wedding, with wine that was worth the patience it had taken, and the music starting up behind us, and our children beginning the first dance. He said, "You could have said something at any point last night." I said, "Yes." He said, "Why didn't you?" I told him that in my experience, the best conversations happen when both people have said everything they intended to say first, that there is more honesty available after someone has spoken freely than before. He considered that. He turned the glass in his hand. He said, My wife says, "You have beautiful eyes." I told him I was aware. He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that changes a face. And for a moment he looked less like the man at the rehearsal dinner, and more like the young man who had once been capable of being surprised. And I thought that was probably the best version of him, the one his wife remembered, the one worth knowing. The band played something slow. Sophia and Daniel moved together on the floor, and around them the guests gathered in the warm, purposeless way people gather when something good is happening, and no one wants to be far from it. I watched my son dance with his wife. I thought about Enzo and the capers. I thought about tram rides in the morning, and the smell of espresso in a bar on a cold November day, and the strange, accidental education of living somewhere foreign until it stopped being foreign and became, quietly, a part of you. I thought that all of it, all 11 years, every argument and adjustment and small daily act of learning had been, in some way, preparation for nothing more dramatic than this. A rehearsal dinner, a glass of Brunello, a sentence spoken in the right language at the right time. Some things are worth waiting for. My son looked up from the dance floor and found me across the room. He smiled. I raised my glass. Outside, Ohio was dark and wide and full of itself the way it always is, and the stars were out, and I was 63 years old, and I was, without qualification, exactly where I was supposed to be.